we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:08 p.m. in an extraordinarily wet, dark, grim, springless, sunless evening in Budapest, entirely befitting life in this city. On a more cheery note, thank you everyone who has joined me for our Thursday evening live stream. It's now 3:09 p.m. on the East Coast of the United States, and we have kind of interesting things taking place. So, President Trump met today with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, a very friendly meeting. And it's clear that essentially the Europeans are not going to fight with Trump on the tariffs. They will come to an agreement with the tariffs. I mean, Meloni made that clear. Trump also made it clear that there will be a deal on the tariffs. Now, what that really means is that all hope, there was a lot of very excited talk last week that somehow there would be a global united front on the tariffs against Trump. Robert is here. Chow from New Jersey, where it's 61 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. That's the key. You know, you can have 61 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, I can take it or leave it. But the sun, that's the key. There's no sun here. That's out. So the key was when Xi Jinping, you know, did his, he issued these few statements, and he did his trip through Southeast Asia, that he was clearly looking for to present the United States with a united front of the world against the United States. It was always a very silly idea because it was never going to happen, for the obvious reason that much of the rest of the world isn't exactly enthused by China, and they weren't going to form an alliance with China against the United States. They may not like the United States. There's a lot not to like about the United States, but they weren't going to join forces with China. And the Europeans, there was a great deal of hope that Europe would somehow join forces with China. The Europeans made clear to China that if you are cut off from the U.S. market, which is really, you know, the engine of Chinese economic growth, don't for 1 minute think that you'll be able to make up for it by getting access to our market. And remember, the European Union runs a huge trade deficit with China, much as the United States does. So the European Union isn't exactly excited about becoming the dumping ground for China's overcapacity, because that clearly is the plan. Because if China can't get access to that U.S. market, and it has this huge overcapacity, and it's not neither able nor willing to develop its own domestic consumer market, then essentially China will have no resort but to dump its products in the European market. And the Europeans have made clear that they were not going to accept this. So that already fell through. But what also fell through was China's attempt, and China made this announcement that somehow China, I think Japan, South Korea, Australia were forming a united front against the United States. And it became clear very early on that that wasn't happening. They made clear no, Japan, South Korea, Australia are not forming a united front with China. And one of the problems that China faces here is that these putative allies of China's, like South Korea, Vietnam, Australia, um, have experience of economic coercion from China. You remember? I mean, we I think we did a Gaggle podcast. I think back in maybe it was in 2020 or something like that. Anyway, with Australia. Now, we're no fans of Australia. I'm certainly not a huge fan of Australia. But what happened was that Australia had announced that it would seek an international inquiry into the origins of COVID. A very reasonable request, something that other countries should have insisted upon and brought this matter up before the United Nations. But they didn't. But Australia did. Um, China responded with fury against Australia and hit Australia ferociously with tariffs. That's always a problem. Tariff. Australia did rely on the Chinese market, and particularly, it sold its Australian wines, very good wines. So the Chinese hit Australian wines with 200% tariffs. Remember, this was in retaliation for Australia's demanding the establishment of an international inquiry into the origins of COVID. Nobody else did this, and Australia did this. And I mean, we've all incidentally suffered as a consequence of the fact that there has been no international inquiry into the origins of COVID, and that basically China has stonewalled, and even that's a very polite way of putting it, stonewalled on what actually went on in that Institute of Virology. What kind of experiments were they conducting? Do they have the samples, all the experiments and the samples that were created, and the residue and everything else? All of that China has kept hidden. It took it off, almost immediately after the outbreak of COVID. Everything was scrapped, and boom, no one had any longer any access online for anything that went on at the Institute of Virology. So Australia wanted an inquiry into this, and China got very angry and retaliated against Australia. It caused some hardship. Now, the other countries have also their grievances. I mean, the Vietnamese have some grievances against China over conflicts over islands in the South China Seas. Leaving aside the rights and wrongs of it, nonetheless, Vietnamese have had their issues with China over these islands in the South China Seas. As has Japan. Japan also has had issues with China. India has had issues with China over the Himalayas. Now, what I'm saying is this doesn't mean any of these conflicts are going to lead to war, but what it does mean is that any hope anyone had that somehow China was going to lead a kind of global united front against Trump was, it was just, again, drinking the Kool-Aid. It was not going to happen. Nobody's very excited about the United States. Nobody particularly likes the United States, but they don't particularly want to accept the leadership of China. And so when the Europeans announced, well, we're not going to allow you to start dumping your products into our markets, and that's the same view that China will receive exactly the same message from others, from the countries of Southeast Asia, from India, from everyone else, that says yeah, I mean, you need to sort this out with the United States because you're not able, you don't have the ability to absorb this excess capacity, then you're not going to make use of our markets for this. So, so when Maloney came and started talking about these deals, and I imagine there will indeed be an agreement with the European Union. The European Union has nowhere to go. Then I think that will be done, and then ultimately um, things will have to be sorted out with China. Now, the the uh, the other thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to see if I can pull this off. Let me see. Me is that the United States is under Trump is planning to slash the State Department budget by 50%. Let's see if I can pull this off. All right. So here, this is the story in the New York Times. Trump administration memo proposing cutting State Department funding by nearly a half. This is the New York Times. The draft plan is part of a process involving the agency and the White House. It would eliminate almost all funding for international organizations that include the United Nations and NATO. And then the Trump administration could cut nearly 50% of the State Department's funding next fiscal year, according to an internal memo laying out a downsizing plan being given serious consideration by department leaders. The plan was drawn up as the White House pressures agencies to make significant budget cuts. The memo, a copy of which was obtained by the New York Times, proposes eliminating almost all funding for international organizations like the United Nations and NATO, ending the budget for supporting international peacekeeping operations, and curtailing all of the department's educational and cultural exchanges like the Fulbright program. It also proposes cutting funding for humanitarian assistance and global health programs by more than 50%, despite Secretary of State Marco Rubio's pledges that life saving assistance would be preserved. It's not clear if Mr. Rubio had endorsed the cuts outlined in the memo. Now, obviously, this will lead to a great deal of weeping and wailing. Um, great picture from Marty in the White House listening to the latest Gaggle live stream. Yes, yes, that's exactly what's going on. Um, but I have to say, this is very, very heartening because remember, the Trump administration has now gutted USAID. It's basically uh, told the NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, that basically it's not going to get the money that has been appropriated for NED is not going to get its hands on. Now, typically enough, a federal judge has put a stop on that. So that's going to, that's going to be decided by the courts. Something similar has happened with Voice of America. Also, a federal judge is preventing the Trump administration from bringing that to an end. But I find all of this very, very heartening. And this is a point I really want to make, which I think the alt media is just simply missing the bus here. They're missing the, the big story here, which is that Trump is actually making a drastic change to the way the U.S. conducts operations, the way the U.S. conducts foreign policy, the way the U.S. has been running its empire for all these years. But instead, when you listen to the alt media, they just it's as if nothing has changed. It's as if it's still Biden. Trump is just carrying on the Biden policy, and so on. So they're not really seeing how drastic Trump's changes are now. And of course, by doing so, Trump is, of course, generating huge opposition. Well, what do you expect? Of course, there would be huge opposition because Trump, by scrapping various programs, he's scrapping a major money, international and domestic money funneling operation. And that's what has to be understood. That this is all of these institutions that are in the crosshairs of Trump, they are part of a major money laundering, funneling, whatever you want to call it, funneling operation. Essentially, U.S. taxpayer money, and this has been going on for years and years, has been used to bankroll the political allies of liberals. The issue with Harvard, and we talked about this last time, that Harvard and the elite universities, is that not only does Harvard kind of perpetuate a particular left liberal ethos, not only does it essentially it is staffed almost exclusively by the left liberals. We talked about this, all the numbers, like 92% or whatever it was, voted for Biden, and then that same left liberal staff, faculty and staff, selects a left liberal student body who are then sent out into the world, to join the elite law firms, to join the elite media, to join the elite NGOs, the foundations, and that they kind of create an infrastructure, a left liberal infrastructure that ordinary Americans cannot break through because they essentially run everything. And that's why people moan and groan about democracy. Yeah, there's no democracy because ultimately all the control within the societies is in the hands of the same groups of people. So that's why it was always important to tackle the issue of the universities, because that's really the hothouse where all this is created. And the universities are in the business of money laundering. They get a lot of money from government, and they spread it out into their political allies. And the political allies in the think tanks. A lot of these think tanks are affiliated with the universities, to the foundations. They sponsor that kind of research, the kind of left liberal research, and that they in turn, these very institutions, these foundations, these think tanks, then transfer this abroad. These are the color revolutions. That's how they create these color revolutions. So that's what the State Department does. Also, USAID does. It's the same money and the same people. The same people who are, 1 minute they're in the universities, then they're in the think tanks, then they're in the law firms, then they're promoting international law. And then, of course, they funnel this money to their political allies in other countries. This is all U.S. taxpayer money. That's how they create groups of people in appropriate countries who will then be in place to do the bidding of the United States. and NATO and the rest. I mean, this is the essence of the color revolution. It's not just simply, oh well, we'll just come in and and which we overturn an election. A color revolution, it takes years to generate a kind of civil society infrastructure in various countries that can be mobilized at a moment's notice to serve U.S. Political interests. Um, and obviously, the first one of them, we saw how efficiently they operated it, was in Yugoslavia in October 2000 that overthrew Milosevic. And then this was applied in the Rose Revolution in Georgia that brought Saakashvili to power. That it was applied in 2004 in Ukraine when they overturned Yanukovych's election and brought in Yushchenko. We had the Cedar Revolution in Lebanon. All of this was ultimately funded from the United States, from NATO, and this is how they go. This is all government money that is being funneled to their political allies. So their political allies at home who are inextricably linked to their political allies abroad. This is how they've been operating. This is a huge amounts of money. And I just find it extraordinary that, again, the alt media, which has been whining about color revolutions for years, rightly, don't see that this is actually shaking up the system. It's sort of bringing that to an end. Because this, ultimately, I mean, once you start butchering the State Department, once you start slashing USAID, once USAID has been liquidated, when basically you're getting rid of Voice of America and the National Endowment for Democracy and Radio Free Europe and all of these bits and pieces, what the people like to say, oh, soft power. But in fact, this is part of that international nexus of like-minded neoliberal elites that gave us, the war in Ukraine, that gave us the expansion of NATO, and that gave us these interminable attempts at color revolutions. And that this is how this has been operated. Trump is attacking this. Trump is attacking universities. Trump is attacking it by scrapping these agencies. And Trump is also attacking it by going after the elite media. And the elite media, it's very important here because they've had the grip on communication for decades. Decades, it's more than decades. It's forever. You just watch the presses of Obama or Biden or Keir Starmer today. Who does Keir Starmer call when he was a press conference? He holds a piece of paper and said, well, first question goes to the BBC. Oh, good. We'll get the BBC. Next question goes to Sky News. Oh, Sky News. Oh, and then ITV. Oh, ITV. And then oh well, now's the Times. Okay, the Times. Oh, the Guardian. Oh, and then you think, well, the entire media landscape has already been transformed, and yet you have heads of government, heads of state, who still will always give the questions, will only answer the questions presented by BBC, Sky News, Deutsche Welle, and whatever. Trump has kind of scrapped that. Suddenly, he's thrust right into the middle of a press gaggle. He's got Real America's Voice. He's got Breitbart. He's broken the grip of the White House Press Association. Now, these are all major changes. I mean, one can't just simply say that oh well everything is exactly the same. So you got somebody like Judge Napolitano, and you know how I hate saying Judge Napolitano. This is Judge Napolitano, and he came on some show. I think it was George Galloway's show, and he said that oh Trump is even worse than Biden. Trump is even worse than Biden. Now, somebody who hasn't identified what a major shift in policy that has occurred um, under Trump, really shouldn't be in this business. Um, Now, the thing that it gets in the way of everything, and I mentioned this when we were talking on Tuesday about Harvard, is that Trump kind of confuses things and brings up extraneous issues such as Israel, anti-Semitism, and everything else. But I kind of think that that's a sort of separate bucket. We have to address that as a separate bucket that Trump is engaged in for whatever reason. Obviously there are many reasons, but nonetheless, that's a separate issue from everything else that he's doing, from everything else that he is making a drastic change in in American policy, both domestic and foreign policy. I mean, the tariffs are clearly a major change. The liquidation of this soft power agencies, the slashing of State Department budget, the abandonment of these color revolutions promoted by Washington, that's a major change. Um, when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, let's leave aside the question of whether this will succeed or not. But it's a major change. He completely abandoned the previous policy that had been promoted by Biden, which was, well, we're just going to keep fighting this to the bitter end. We're going to keep fighting, essentially, the way it was formulated, to the last Ukrainian. We're just going to keep doing this. And that was the Biden policy, that was the NATO policy, that was obviously the Zelensky policy, and that's, in other words, we're just going to keep it going in the expectation that somehow, at some point, Putin is going to come to the negotiating table. Putin will suddenly realize how hopeless this situation is, and he's going to come to the negotiating table. This policy obviously has failed completely, but nonetheless, no one in NATO land, no one in the Biden administration, no one in the UK or anywhere else thought of abandoning this ridiculous, stupid, destructive policy. No, Putin will come to the negotiating table. But Trump abandoned that and said that the most important consideration for him is not that Ukraine must prevail, that somehow Putin must be taught a lesson, Putin must be defeated, Putin must be made to withdraw from Ukraine. He said, no, the main consideration for U.S. policy in Ukraine is to bring this war to an end as soon as possible. The killing has to stop. That's his policy. Now, how you get there, that is a different question, but that has to be kept separate from the fact that this is a major change in policy. And that once you've set the goal to end it, then you ultimately are going to move towards ending it, and he will move towards ending it. It will end somehow, because he has put that forward as his objective. Not we're going to bump Putin to the negotiating, and not we're going to do nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, and all the rest of it. No, we're going to bring this war to an end. And if that's your objective, then I think you'll achieve it. How long it will take, I don't know. And nobody knows that. Um, but what was guaranteed before under the old policy was that it would go on forever because the Russians weren't going to capitulate, and so therefore NATO, the United States, were committed to keeping this war going. Just keep sending more and more arms, and therefore just keeping the killing going. So again, from Napolitano to say, "Oh, he's worse than Biden," you have to say, um, I really think Napolitano isn't the brightest bulb in the firmament or the sharpest knife in the drawer. Now that obviously is a major change in policy. But then you have the immigration issue, and here again, people are kind of missing the bus, which is that he may well lose a number of cases, but he is blazing a trail that nobody had thought was possible. Nobody had thought that anybody could do that kind of a thing. Nobody actually thought in terms of deportations. Why? Because the moment you try to deport anyone, then along come the lawyers. They rush to court, and they get a judge to order the cessation of deportation. I mean, it's a nice little game. This has been going on for years and years. It's going on in the United States. It goes on in the UK. It goes on in Europe. In other words, once you're in, you're in. It's virtually impossible to get you out. And this is what they do. And people say, oh, well, somebody should. There's a need for due process. Due process. It's guaranteed in the Constitution. Well, it is guaranteed. It is guaranteed in the Constitution. But if you go down that path of a due process and say everybody is, Ego says Napolitano didn't say no change. He said worse. That's what I said. I said he's worse. They said Trump is worse than Biden. Now he said his primary issue is the First Amendment. Now, the issue of the First Amendment is by no means that clear because Trump has supported First Amendment, but not on the no, you argued change. What are you talking about? I argued. I know what I said. I said he went on George Galloway's show and said he is worse than Biden. Trump is worse than Biden. That's what I said. That's how I started saying he's worse than Biden. And I think it's kind of ridiculous thing to say. And that's how I started about Napolitano, who he said he is worse than Biden. So please listen to what I actually said instead of just rushing and saying, oh, you thought what you said. I said Napolitano went on George Galloway's show and said Trump is worse than Biden. And so that's that's why it's just a very narrow-minded view that these kind of civil libertarian positions, because ultimately you have to address the immigration issue. I mean, because otherwise, if you don't, that means everybody stays. Everybody stays who is already there. And then if Trump fails, and that's the important thing, if Trump fails and he doesn't really get anybody out, and he's stuck forever in the courts, which is what everybody's counting on, and that's what everybody ultimately is counting on, the fact he will be stuck in the courts, that these smart lawyers are going to go there, they're going to put in their temporary restraining orders and say that, well, we can't really deport this person. Why? Well, because he is likely to face persecution in his home country. Oh, well, okay, well, we better find another country. Yeah, we better find another country. All right. But of course, you're never going to find another country, so that's not going to happen. Um, and so that's something that's similar to what happened to Garcia, the Maryland man from El Salvador. Um, Now, in his case, um, he entered the country illegally. I think I thought it was in 2011, but what's the Attorney General Pam Bondi said 2012. I thought it was 2011. Okay, she said 2012. Um, and then he came to the attention of the police. I don't know, whatever. He was arrested, or whatever the circumstances of his arrest in 2019. Um, he was adjudicated. Oh no, no, it was not adjudicated. The judge thought that there was credible evidence that he was a member of MS-13. The issue wasn't adjudicated, but nonetheless, he said there was credible evidence that he was a member of MS-13. And since he was in the country illegally, he was eligible for deportation. But then comes the key, and this always happens whenever you have these deportation hearings, which is that when he can't be sent back to El Salvador because he has a reasonable fear of violence and death at the hands of a gang. It wasn't MS-13, some other gang. And so the judge said, well, okay, well, we better stay here. And we'll find a third country to remove you to. Oh, okay. So, and then, of course, as he stayed, he got a work permit because, of course, if you're in the country and you haven't been deported, well, you're going to at least be able to support yourself, because the alternative is the taxpayers are going to just pay your board and lodging. And so he basically stayed on with a work permit. Now then, he was removed. I mean, it's not clear exactly the circumstance of why he was removed and sent to El Salvador by the government, by the Trump administration. And then this whole thing, which is somehow we have to bring him back. Now, the problem about it has to be brought back because the judge, the only reason he has to be brought back is not because he's a U.S. citizen, even though the media tried to suggest that he's a U.S. citizen by saying he's a Maryland man. But they said he needs to be brought back because an immigration judge in 2019 had determined that he should not be sent to El Salvador. um, yeah, yeah. Then that's the only reason. Now she said, "Oh, you have to effectuate his return." So then the matter went up to the Supreme Court. So the Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the ruling by the district court judge, and so it went up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, "Well, I don't know. We don't know exactly what effectuate means, but he's now in El Salvador, and bringing him back from El Salvador kind of involves the president's Article 2 powers. This is now a foreign policy matter. He has to negotiate something with the president of El Salvador. So a judge can't intrude upon the president's Article 2 powers. So the Supreme Court did say, yes, he needs to be brought back. but they said, well, you have to facilitate it. They didn't really explain in what sense there's to be facilitated. Um, 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 so now the question is this: where do you when you bring him back? Now, somebody's saying, oh, well, there's no necessarily determinative evidence as to whether he is a member of MS-13. That really is neither here nor there, because now, um, he's already in the country. He was already in the country illegally. So you're already in the country illegally. You had entered the country legally, so therefore you are eligible for deportation and to be banned from entering the United States for 5, 10, whatever years. Also, the United States and any country can prevent anyone from entering the country on the merest suspicion that he has unsavory connections. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be adjudicated in the court of law, and with counsel on one side and counsel on the other, and we go hearings, and evidence is presented on one side, evidence is presented on the other. It doesn't have to be that way. Innumerable people have been prevented from entering the United States because they were suspected of either being communist, close to communist, friendly to communists, having taken one too many trips behind the Iron Curtain. Boom, they couldn't come enter the United States. Same as today, I mean, if you have, they believe that you belong to organizations that are anti-immigrant organizations, and you write columns that are anti-immigrant, or with that, some Katie Hopkins type person. The government can say, "Nah, we don't want you." It's completely. There doesn't have to be any kind of a rigorous court ruling. They can just simply say you can't enter the country. Now, that's just the practice. Now the problem with Garcia, this Abrego Garcia, is that again, whether he was or was not an MS-13 is just it's not important, and it's not going to be adjudicated. That's it's not. There aren't going to be any court hearings on this. It just that's what the U.S. government says, and since he's not a U.S. citizen and was in the country illegally, basically there's no reason the U.S. government needs to take it any further. The problem, however, is that obviously Trump can bring back the Abrego Garcia if he wanted to. Yeah, he could absolutely lean on the El Salvador Bukele, the El Salvador president, and bring him back. But there is a problem, which is that if he does bring him back, he's going to look like a fool, and he's going to absolutely undercut his immigration policy. Because what would happen if he were brought back? He would immediately, of course, be arrested. He would be hauled before an immigration judge, and an immigration judge would say, yeah, he's eligible for deportation, but he can't go to El Salvador. He's in danger in El Salvador, so therefore we have to find a third country to take him. In other words, he's going to rule exactly the same way as the judge in 2019 ruled, in which case he stays in perpetuity, because no country is going to say, yeah, we'll take him. Why would any country say we're going to take him? Why would anyone want to take him? I mean, they look at his record. They say, well, I know he doesn't look a particularly savory character. He doesn't look like he's someone who's going to be able to support himself. He's going to become a dependency on the state, and he's going to maybe get into all kinds of trouble. Why should we take him? So he would stay. So essentially, Trump would bring him back, and then He would stay, and that would of course then encourage everybody, all migrants, anyone who has been deported, to do the same thing. But we want to come back, and would address the problem. I mean, yes, people have due process rights as guaranteed by the Constitution, but if you're talking about, how many illegal immigrants are there in the United States? Whatever. Oh well, 11 million. That's the number that's been sanctified. It was sanctified about 30 years ago. It was maybe even more than 30 years ago. So there are 11 million illegal immigrants in the United States, and it just stayed the same. Despite all the mass migration that's taken place over the past 30 years, it still magically stays at that number. There are 11 million illegal migrants in the United States. Um, but you'd have to say it's a hell of a lot more than that. You'd have to say that probably 30 to 40 million people, 30 to 40 million illegals. So imagine the huge undertaking of providing due process to 30 to 40 million people. I mean, the courts are already overburdened. I mean, all of the courts are overburdened. Imagine you now have 30 to 40 million migrants who who are entitled to due process rights. And remember, due process rights means you go through the whole legal system. You start off with an immigration judge, and then you go up to the district court judge and the circuit court, and so on and so forth. All that takes a long, long time. And everyone knows this. And everyone knows, of course, it's going to take a long time. Of course, and it's the logistics is just impossible. And that's why the immigration lobby, a very powerful lobby, has kind of been smirking for many years, because saying it's never going to happen. You are never going to get these people out. The only thing you can do, and politicians have been reluctant. They've moved in that direction, but each time they've done it, it's caused so much political backlash. The only thing you can do is you give an amnesty. You amnesty everybody. Now, the problem with an amnesty is, of course, that that serves to encourage further immigration. Of course, it does, because then everybody is going to want to come in the expectation that down the road, 20 years' time, 30 years' time, 40 years' time, there will be an amnesty. And what's more, whatever, if Trump fails, and I think if he's forced to bring back Abrego Garcia, and the judge says, well, I'm afraid you're gonna have to stay here until we find a third country to take you, then whoever comes after Trump, he's gonna the next president, he's gonna throw open the gates with a vengeance. I mean, this is gonna be a reckoning time against Trump. And that's why I think, because Trump has taken huge gambles on the immigration policy, on the tariff policy, on his attacks on the various agencies of the U.S. government, his attacks on the law firms. He's taken huge gambles. If he fails, there's going to be a hell to pay, because whoever comes in next, somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they're going to pursue exactly the opposite policies. Boom, they're going to throw open the gates and let everybody in. They're going to pour money down the sinkhole of U.S. agencies and color revolutions like there's no tomorrow. So that's why it's like I like those. The Talk Watcher says hire more judges. However many judges you hire, there is no way that you can handle 40 million cases going through the entire legal process. The legal process is just, it's staggering. Its length and complexity. It just cannot happen. And that's why if you went down this path, ultimately you just have to throw your hands up and say, "Well, there's just no way. We just don't have the resources to deal with 40 million people." So that's where Trump really is now at. He's taken a gamble, um, and if it doesn't come off, then there's going to be hell to pay. And then not only are you going to get the next person, this Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, president, vice president, Ilan Omar. I guess she wasn't born in the United States, so but maybe they can get rid of that, the whole natural born citizen. But the Ilan Omar, or I don't know whoever would be part of that team. They're going to bring everyone in. I mean, these people are determined to affect a demographic change in the United States. And they said, and in light of Trump's failure to arrest this process, they said, that's it. Now's our moment, and we're going to just throw the gates open, and then down the road, we're going to offer an amnesty. Now the the uh, issue here then is whatever the issue, whatever the case, whether the administrative error was an administrative error, somebody didn't look up that ruling by the immigration judge in 2019 saying he can't be sent to El Salvador. That's the core issue. But I think Trump, and I think the Trump Justice Department will just say we don't want him because we can't bring him into this country because we think he's MS-13. It doesn't matter whether he is or isn't. I mean, let's leave that aside. He said, we think he's MS-13. We think there's evidence that he's MS-13, and that's enough for us. So we're not going to bring him. We're not going to bring, and we are by law not allowed to bring in anyone who's suspected to be a terrorist. So we're not going to do it. Now, the Supreme Court had simply ruled that that they need to not effectuate but facilitate. I don't know what facilitate means. I mean, it could mean almost anything. I mean, you could say facilitate. So you go to Bukele and say, do you want to release him and send him to us? And then Bukele says, well, do you want him? And then they say, not particularly. Okay, well, if you don't particularly want him, then I'm not going to release him. All right. Well, we did what we could. I mean, we talked to him. We asked, do you want to release him? He said no. I mean, it's still in accord with the principle of facilitating. We actually did raise the question with him. Do you want to send it? Do you want to send him back to us? And he said no. So okay, end of story. I mean, unless the Supreme Court decides to change its position and demand his return, I think it's done. The reason I don't think the Supreme Court will change its position is that the Supreme Court made the issue about the president's Article 2 powers. And the Supreme Court really doesn't want to get involved with usurping the powers of the other branches of government. And since this is a foreign policy issue, then the Supreme Court will say, look, this is a matter of the president negotiating with the president of El Salvador, and therefore we can't start second guessing what agreements they can and can't reach. But as I say, the crucial question is, and this is again for Europe, that you have to be able to address the immigration issue. You have to be able to find a way, not just to stop people coming in, because that at least is doable. I mean, it hasn't been done, but at least it's doable. But you got to find a way of removing the immigrants who are already in the country, because we've seen what happened in Germany. We're in Germany with all these crimes committed, and it's almost always somebody who has already been adjudicated by the courts as eligible for deportation. It's just that nobody ever deported them. So this is after years and years of litigation. Finally, the courts decide this person is not entitled to asylum and he should be removed. And then, this person then commits some terrible crime. So if Trump fails, then I think all attempts to control immigration will fail, and no one's going to try it again. No, there's in the way, like, Trump has done so many things that other, I don't know, figures on the right or conservatives have threatened to do, but didn't even make the first move towards doing them. He has done it. So therefore, if he fails, then no one's going to do it. No one's going to dare. They'll say, "Yeah, that's exactly. Well, we're just going to go back to the old practice that particularly conservatives used to do, which is every time there's an election, we promise, yeah, absolutely, we're going to deal with the immigration issue. We're going to send them back. We're going to close the border. We're going to do all that. And then once you won the election, then you forget the whole thing." And that little game. If Trump fails, they just go back to that little game. So that's that. Now, the one other thing that I did want to address, and that's this very interesting article that appeared in the New York Times about the bombing of Iran. So, as I said, the Israel thing is one where Trump really hasn't made any serious changes. I mean, Trump has continued the Biden policy. Whether it's worse than or not than the Biden policy, then that's a matter of opinion. But nonetheless, he's continued with the. So Michael McGotrick says, "Hit the thumbs up sign." Yes, hit the thumbs up sign. Always, just hit the thumbs up sign. So, but Trump hasn't done that. There's no question. He hasn't made any real changes. There seemed initially that he would make a change when he got the ceasefire. But since then he's endorsed Netanyahu. But now there's a story in the New York Times about the plans to bomb Iran. Now, the issue of bombing Iran has always been something that the Israelis, whether it's Netanyahu or whoever's in charge in Tel Aviv, has always been pressing the United States to do, because Israel can't really do this by itself. Israel needs support from the United States. First of all, it needs the United States to join in the bombing, and then it needs United States air defense systems and anti-missile defense systems in order to ward off the inevitable Iranian retaliation. So that was always good. That's why Netanyahu always wanted to get the Americans involved, so that it would be a joint operation, but essentially it would mean an American operation. And that's why Netanyahu came to Washington last week. He wanted to get this deal done between the United States and Israel to agree on an attack on Iran. As it turned out, during this meeting, during the press availability, Trump announced that there would be negotiations with Iran in Oman, on Saturday, and Netanyahu really wasn't very happy about that. He wanted, he wanted this this agreement that they would get this plan off the ground. But instead of getting an agreement, Trump said, no, we're going to have these negotiations in Oman, led by Witkoff. So now the New York Times has published a kind of a background on what had been going on, what the negotiations between the United States and Israel on this attack on Iran, and it's clear that there were members of the administration who wanted to go ahead, but in the end, there were those in the administration who didn't want this to go ahead, who were very opposed to an attack on Iran, and fortunately, Trump sided with those who said no, we're not going to do this. So let me just look at this article in the Times, and here we have Trump waved off Israeli strike after divisions emerged in his administration. Israel developed plans for attacking Iranian nuclear facilities that would have required U.S. assistance. But some administration officials had doubts. So that's the key here, is that Israel cannot do this by itself. If Israel were able to attack Iran by itself, Israel would, of course, have done it. They can't do it without the Americans. And so it says Israel had planned to strike Iranian nuclear sites as soon as next month, but was waved off by President Trump in recent weeks in favor of negotiating a deal with Tehran to limit its nuclear program. Mr. Trump made his decision after months of internal debate over whether to pursue diplomacy or support Israel in seeking to set back Iran's ability to build a bomb. And Israeli officials had recently developed plans to attack Iranian nuclear sites in May. They were prepared to carry them out, and at times were optimistic that the United States would sign off. The goal of the proposals, according to officials briefed on them, was to set back Tehran's ability to develop nuclear weapon by a year or more. And almost all of the plans would have required U.S. help, not just to defend Israel from Iranian retaliation, but also to ensure that an Israeli attack was successful, making the United States a central part of the attack itself. There were many reasons that Israeli officials expected Mr. Trump to take an aggressive line on Iran. So this is the key. Is Netanyahu and the rest of them were expecting Trump to sign off on this plan? There were many reasons that Israeli officials expected Mr. Trump to take an aggressive line on Iran. In 2020, he ordered the killing of General Soleimani, and Iran sought to hire hitmen to assassinate Mr. Trump during last year's presidential campaign. That's, of course, all nonsense. There was never any evidence for that. But inside the Trump administration, some officials were becoming skeptical of the Israeli plan. In a meeting this month, one of several discussions about the Israeli plan, Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, presented a new intelligence assessment that said the buildup of American weaponry could potentially spark a wider conflict with Iran that the United States did not want. A range of officials echoed Ms. Gabbard's concerns in the various meetings. Susie Wiles, which is very interesting that the White House Chief of Staff is involved in these kinds of policy discussions. Susie Wiles, the White House Chief of Staff, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and Vice President J.D. Vance all voiced doubts about the attack. Even Mr. Waltz, frequently one of the most hawkish voices on Iran, was skeptical that Israel's plan could succeed without substantial American assistance. So this is really quite interesting because it sounds like more or less everyone in the administration, all the senior figures in the national security stuff, because it says even Waltz seems to have come around saying, well, I'm not sure this is such a great idea. But Hegseth said no. Vance, we would have expected Vance to say no. Um, Tulsi Gabbard said no, and then you say, well, who would have said yes? Well, the only person whose name isn't mentioned here is Marco Rubio, which is exactly what we would have expected. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, Mr. Neocon, the man who was groomed, has been groomed by the neocons for years and years. Because if all of those people were against the idea, then you say, well, who was for it? Who was pushing it? That you've listed almost all the people who count. And so you well, obviously Marco Rubio, but then you'd have to say, if this is true, then that's a real setback for Bibi. And we had a number of podcasts about that meeting with Bibi, in which Bibi was hoping to get some concessions from Trump, which he didn't get. He wanted the tariffs, the 17% tariffs. He didn't get that removed. He wanted support against Turkey and Syria. He didn't get that. Instead, he got this commitment by Trump to hold a meeting with Iran in Oman. So there's going to be another round of discussion in Rome. I think it's going to be in Rome on Saturday, and again with Witkoff. Now, with Witkoff, we were kind of optimistic after the first round of talks, because it seemed like Witkoff, and that means Trump, because Witkoff just simply repeats what his instructions from Trump, was willing to accept simply that Iran limits its uranium enrichment to 3.5%, which I think what they agreed upon in the JCPOA back in 2015. So it's effectively the same thing, and was insisting on nothing else. It was not insisting that Iran give up its allies. It was not insisting that Iran give up its ballistic missiles. Just simply, Iran goes back to enrichment up until 3.5%. Whatever enriched uranium is in the possession of Iran, Iran would just have to give it up, as they did in 2015 when they handed over all their enriched uranium to Russia. And so with that's why the first round of talks seemed so really positive, because that's a deal that Iran would take. Iran doesn't seem to want to develop nuclear weapons, or at least publicly, that's what they say. I think Iran accepts that it just can't have nuclear weapons, that if it did, that it would come under attack. So Iran was willing to go along with that. And because Witkoff wasn't insisting, as Mike Waltz was insisting a few weeks earlier, that Iran give up its civilian energy program. Basically, the entire civilian nuclear energy program be dismantled. That was what Waltz was insisting on. That's what Netanyahu was insisting on during his trip to the United States. He didn't say that in Trump's presence, but he did say that during his the various interviews that he gave. That the entirety of Iran's civilian nuclear energy program has to be dismantled. And that obviously is a non-starter. Iran is never going to accept that. But now, in recent days, in the last day or so, Witkoff seems to have accepted this as now that, Iran has to dismantle its civilian nuclear energy program. Now, I don't know whether has the administration changed its policy? Is that now the new Trump policy? In which case, the meeting in Rome on Saturday won't go anywhere. But nonetheless, that's what Witkoff seems to be saying. So after Witkoff having said to Sean Hannity earlier in the week that all we want to do, Iran can have its Iran can have its civilian nuclear energy program. It can keep it. It can maintain its enrichment level as long as it doesn't go beyond 3.5%. And then that's it. And that seemed like, well, that's the basis of an agreement. I mean, admittedly, it's not. It's pretty much the same as the JCPOA, but who the hell cares? At least you have a deal, and then the threat of bombing and war is off the table. But now the people say that, well, if America signs this deal, Israel can still attack Iran. No, of course he can't attack Iran. There's no way. If Trump signs an agreement with Iran, which is more or less the same as the JCPOA, Israel cannot attack Iran. Israel cannot do it because then Israel will be defying the United States, and Israel has never dared to do that. Israel is, and Netanyahu is very crafty. For all his big talk, he's never defied the United States. So if Trump signs this deal, then Bibi will have to accept it. He's not going to do anything else. But then the question is, well, is Trump going to stick with Witkoff on Tuesday when he talked with Sean Hannity, and that's the basis of a deal, or is that going to be, Witkoff's more recent comment, which is would dismantle the entirety of the nuclear energy program, which of course is a non-starter. So we're going to have to see. But as I say, I mean, Trump has made a lot of dramatic changes, and it's very, very interesting, really, to see whether he can pull this off. Changes that other presidents, Nixon, Reagan, had promised but never delivered on. And Trump has tried to do it, and the price of failure is very high, because if you fail, no one's ever going to try this again. And to the contrary, it's your opponents who are going to have an absolute field day and pursuing exact opposite policies. All right, let's take a look at some of the comments on our locals page. These are the Gagglers who care about the dogs. They know that the dogs take out their rage on me. That's the key. That they always attack me. The first thing they do when they look at the tip jar is immediately to go after me. What the hell have you been doing? So I'm really appreciative. People who contribute to the tip jar. Stone River, always very good to see you. Thank you for your generosity, Stone River. And Stone River says Maloney is like a state governor when it comes to tariffs. Trade policy is under the control of the European Union. That's right. I mean that was the only thing that she really had to offer was that, well, she alone among Europe's leaders, well, with the exception of, say, Viktor Orban, she alone among the Europe's leaders has good relations with Trump. In other words, that they have a similar kind of political background, and that therefore she can get around Trump and put him in a good mood, offer him some honeyed words, and assure Trump that we in Europe are ready to sign a deal with you. So that's really the purpose of it. But you're absolutely right. Trade policy is entirely in the hands of the European Commission, and that's why Trump imposed the 10% tariff on Well, he was originally was the 10%, but then he slapped on the 20%. That was the reciprocal tariff. He slapped on the 20%. But that was the entire on everybody in the European Union. But Maloney, I mean, he kind of liked Maloney, and we also know that Maloney seems to have good relations with Elon Musk, where and she doesn't have particularly good relations with Emmanuel Macron. And I think we've all seen the pictures or videos on the internet of the faces she pulls whenever she encounters Macron. So really, yeah, I mean, in terms of negotiating on behalf of the EU, no, she doesn't do that. But Trump doesn't hit it off particularly with certainly not with the Germans or the German Social Democrats. He hasn't met Merz yet, but he's not doesn't have particularly warm relations with Macron. In fact, Macron seems to annoy him. Um, but I think he likes Maloney, and the kind of the presser that they had today was kind of fun. They seemed to there was a kind of friendly banter between them. So I think that was the purpose of her visit. Hey, let's cool it. Let's not get into a nasty spat. Had Ursula von der Leyen showed up, things might have been different. I don't think he would particularly hit it off with her. She would start talking in that harsh German way with her. We have the tools. That just wouldn't go right. So I think that was really the purpose of the Maloney visit. Anyway, Stone River, thank you so much for your generosity. Vic Shakapopoulos, good to see you. Says, George, I promise it's the last time. Oh, that's good. I'm touching on this topic. In many podcasts, you expressed your doubts about the story of the Skripal case. Yeah. And you said you don't believe that what we are being fed is true. Yes. However, you are not able to prove what exactly happened there. Nope. Same with the I think I know where this is going. All right. All right. Go on. Same with the 2020 election. You think they've been rigged, and there are certain clues that suggest it, but you are not able to prove in an indisputable way. Then why do you dismiss all the doubts about the story of the JFK assassination just because no one is able to present and a 100% inarguable theory? You're applying different logic to that case. Well, the I think that there's so much more evidence um, refuting the official Skripal case um, and the 2020 election. I mean, there's been an enormous amount of very credible evidence presented that the 2020 election was a joke, a farce. Now, because there's been no proper official inquiry into the 2020 election, we have to make do with with the sort of whatever ad hoc investigations people have undertaken. That suffices to call into question the official story that this was the safest, best election ever. Um, but this emerged almost immediately. It's not like, well, we have to wait and whatever. Almost immediately there were real questions about the story. I mean, really, very very dubious story. Now the problem, and the same with the Skripals. It made no sense. This is the deadliest nerve agent known to man. Puts the VX nerve agent to shame. Terrible. Devastating, and yet, whoa, they managed to survive. The cop who found them, she managed to survive. Um, then we had the daughter who put in a telephone call. She found the telephone and put in a call to her cousin in Moscow, and then she was taken off the any ability to call. And then the story that they came up with, those two ridiculous figures, Popov and Ivanov or whatever, the would-be assassins who traveled um, together. The story was ludicrous and ludicrous at the time. Now, the problem with the Oswald case is that a plausible story emerged right away. And really, there was, you can quibble about this or that, but the story, but for instance, I mean, the one that people quibble about and brought up, oh, well, how did the CIA lose track of Oswald? He had defected to the Soviet Union, a communist. He was, he found a Soviet wife, came back to the United States. So how did the CIA lose track of him? All right, that's a fair question. Then I say, okay, well, how many terrorist cases have been in recent years when you had a terrorist who was on the watch list? The FBI, either the FBI here in the United States or security forces in the UK or in Europe had this person absolutely on the watch list, and yet this person was still able to go get a bomb, make it, go to the place wherever he let off the bomb. And you think, well, how did that happen? He was on the radar. Everyone knew that this is a person who was dangerous. He'd spent time in Libya, he'd spent time in Syria, Iraq. He was known to people. He had made postings on the internet, and yet even so, somehow he was able to carry out his terrorist act. And then when this happens, say, well, I don't know how it happened. I mean, it looks like people really didn't know what the hell to do with it. I mean, they could go on monitoring him, but until somebody has actually committed a crime, there's not a lot anyone can do about it. Oswald was an American citizen. If Oswald wanted to return to the United States, the United States was obligated to take him back. He came, and so that's why the United States took him back. What were the Americans supposed to do with him? Put him in prison as soon as he landed in the United States? No, he came back, and they did keep they did keep him under observation. After all, they knew perfectly well that he had attempted then to defect to Cuba, that he had tried to visit the Cuban embassy in Mexico City, but it's quite likely that they thought this guy is just mentally unstable. After all, everyone else seemed to think he was mentally. I mean, the Cubans thought he was mentally unstable first because, after all, the Cubans wouldn't let him in to the embassy. I mean, either they thought he was mentally unstable, or they thought that this was an agent provocateur. So it's clearly a story of an enormous number of oversights. However, how the hell was anyone supposed to think, oh, this guy's going to go and shoot the president of the United States? I mean, I mean, you're supposed to know this in advance. So I find it plausible, that they just didn't think he would do this. They sort of kept track of him, thought that that he was relatively harmless, but until he actually commits a crime, there's not a great deal that can be done about it. But the point of still with the case is that this happened 1963. So this is now more than 60 years ago. So the alternative theorists, the theorists of the alternative explanation, have had plenty of time to come up with a plausible alternative case of what actually happened, who killed Kennedy, what role, if any, Oswald played in it, how was this done, how was this covered up, how did they manage to get Oswald to be the patsy, Um, that you've had 60 years to do this, but it hasn't been done. I mean, people have put forward a variety of possible culprits. The CIA did it, the military did it, the mafia did it, the Cubans did it, the Soviets did it. Um, the more recent one is that the Israelis did it, and but the more theories that you put forward, the more likely is it that the original explanation is the right one. I mean, if you have to keep, juggling around with one after the other and after the other, it means you don't really have a plausible alternative, and so you're just shuffling around from one thing to another. Whereas the Warren Commission explanation, with all the stories of the incompetence and whatever, it's still, I think it still hasn't been shaken. So I don't think the analogy that you draw is the same. The case of the Skripals, and I don't believe the official story of the Skripals, but I don't know at the same time where they are now. Are they dead? Maybe. Um, and the 2020 election, I think, yeah. I mean, I don't have the evidence that it was definitive evidence that it was indeed a stolen election, but a lot of evidence immediately came forward to bring into question the official story. Whereas I don't think that really that has been met in the case of the Kennedy assassination. Anyway, thank you so much for your question. Marty, always good to see you, Marty. Merry Thursday, George and Gagglers. Well, thank you so much, Marty. Thank you as always for all your super postings and really interesting stuff. Really makes it the Gaggle locals page so interesting and entertaining and lively. So we thank Marty for that. Thank you so much. And then NKMRD says, I'm very disappointed by these artificial intelligence services provided on the X platform. What does it say here? The last episode, can you summarize the last episode of the Gaggle with Peter and George? The last episode of the Gaggle with Peter and George, titled TG 1821. We're a long way from that. It's a long way. I think the Bosnian Serb president convicted, sentenced to prison, was released on February 27th. Yeah, that was a long time ago. And runs for 18 minutes, hosted by Peter Lavelle and George Samuel. The episode discusses the conviction, Senator. But that wasn't even, I think it was just me. I was just by myself. Peter wasn't on that one. Specific details about the discussion points, guests, or arguments made are not fully outlined in the available information, but the show typically aims to challenge mainstream media narrative on political events. For a detailed summary, you may need to watch the episode on their YouTube channel or other platforms like Rumble and Local. Yeah, it's pretty dismal. I mean, I agree with you. It's not very impressive. This is on the X platform. Yeah. Well, thanks for. I didn't realize it was as dismal as that. Yeah. Um, very unimpressive. Thank you. Robert says the cutting off the State Department budget reminds me of the jokes about lawyers. Question: what do you call cutting off 50? I know this joke. Okay, what do you call cutting off 50% of the State Department budget? Answer: a good start. That's it. That's it. What do you What do you? That's right. What do you call cutting 50% of that? What do you call? How does it go? Sometimes. What do you think about? I don't know. 1,000 lawyers at the bottom of the ocean or something like that. Like a good start. So, yeah. Yes, I agree. A half that doesn't do it. You gotta. We need more. Anyway, thank you, Robert. NKMRD says, I feel there's a wear off effect of color revolutions and mafiosi US style politics. Yeah, but again, this is because of the Trump effect. Trump. This is clearly going the foreign interference, the stupid forever wars, and the feeling that the people who run the color revolutions are essentially members of the left liberal political infrastructure, intellectual political infrastructure. And so naturally, Trump is hostile because he realizes these people will hate me. They will see me as an enemy. They all want to block my passage to power. I didn't do anything to stop them during my first term, but now I'm going to try and do something about them. So he instinctively feels that the Color Revolution Brigade are his political enemies, and he wants to destroy this. If Trump fails and Trump is replaced by, I don't know, I mean, I said facetiously Alexandria Ocasio Cortez. I'm not sure she can win an election, but maybe. But let's say he's replaced by Gavin Newsom. All this is going to come back. And everyone will be rejoicing. All the color revolution and all the US agencies and everyone, they're going to be back. And they will indeed be putting forward their kind of left liberal, globalist, neoliberal agenda, rejoicing in the defeat of Trump and rejoicing in the certainty that nothing like Trump will ever raise its ugly head again. So I think it's understandable why he's doing this. So you're right. There's a wariness about color revolutions on the part of Trump and people around him, whether it's J.D. Vance or Mike Pence, who seems to be quite influential within that world. Um, but uh, but you know, if you know, you just wait. The anti-Trumpians could easily come back with a vengeance. Um, anyway, and then Vic Shakapopoulos says, which battles do you consider the most important in the 20th century? I tend to believe the 1920 Battle of Warsaw proved to be inconsequential, but maybe as a Pole I'm biased. But if the Red Army, after a victory, would reach Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary and ignite revolutions there, it would totally change the political and geopolitical dynamics of the continent and the world. Huh. Well, that's interesting. I mean but I think I agree with you that the failure. It wasn't just the Battle of Warsaw, but the failure of the revolutions in Eastern Central Europe between 1919 and 1920 was to prove fateful, because essentially the Soviet Union was then constricted, and then Europe was in the grip of a kind of clerical fascist, clerical fascist, proper fascist Nazi regimes, all of whom were viscerally hostile to fascism, viscerally hostile to communism, viscerally hostile to the Soviet Union, and determined to crush communism and the Soviet Union once and for all. So, in a way, the failure of the Bolsheviks in 1919, 1920 to spread their revolution, the failure in Hungary, the failure in Poland through force of arms, failure in Germany was to prove fateful. I think that's an interesting one. I hadn't really thought about it. I guess I tend to think that the victory, one of the Red Army victory in, maybe, obviously you can say Stalingrad, but maybe the Battle of Moscow was a more important victory, because with the Battle of Moscow, it inflicted the first serious defeat on the Wehrmacht, and so essentially, at the very least, it created the condition for the ultimate defeat of Germany. It would obviously take time, But that defeat really meant that ultimately Germany could not win this war. Um, it could still survive. It could still occupy large parts of territory within the Soviet Union, but it couldn't really win the war. Um, the what happened after 1945 was, in a way, a major defeat for the Western powers. I mean, the sort of the Anglo-French Americans who who had had a high time of it. Really, this was a serious setback for them. Having defeated Nazi Germany, they had to accept something that they really, really didn't want to accept. I mean, if you were just talking about, what happened in 1919, 1920, communism had basically been crushed in Europe, pushed back, and just into the Soviet Union, and then ultimately it was just a matter of waiting for the right time to go to war with the Soviet Union. So that was the situation between World War One and World War Two. But now, after World War Two, with this stunning victory for the Soviet Union, and clearly a major reverse for the Western powers, um, that was the creation of a world that the Western powers really did not want. They didn't want it, and that's why they had to accept. They had to accept that they lost half of Eastern Central Europe, all those countries that had been within their sphere of influence. They were now gone. They were really in the sphere of influence of the Russians, the despicable, detestable, contemptible Russians whom they had despised. And now the Russians were right in the heart of Europe. They were in Berlin. They were occupying Berlin, half of Germany. I mean, not territorially and population, it wasn't half of Germany. Nonetheless, you had a divided Germany. So this was a huge victory for the Russians or the Soviet, and a huge setback for the Western powers. And they put up with it very unhappily, thanks to the nuclear weapons. But I mean, they put up with it for 45 years. And the moment they saw their opportunity, which was the collapse of the Soviet Union with Gorbachev's kind of half-baked reforms, they moved. They moved, with such speed, essentially to restore the status quo ante. So East and Central Europe, they are ours. They belong to us. Russians took it from us in 1945 because of their stunning victory over the Wehrmacht. No one else could have done it. They did it. They defeated the Wehrmacht, and this was their prize. So they absolutely rushed in and sought to push the Russians out from Eastern Central Europe once and for all. And they did a pretty effective job of it. I mean, the NATO expansion thing has been pretty effective. I mean, when they pushed it right into the heart of, into what was the Russian Empire, right into the heart by getting the whole of Ukraine. In other words, they were now just a few miles from Moscow. That was just a little too much for the Russians, but it just showed the overweening arrogance of the West in thinking they could pull this off, essentially to grab Ukraine and bring it into its orbit. But you could see how greedily and aggressively the West sought to rectify what they had to put up with from 45 to 90, and what they're still trying to do in trying to crush the Serbs in Europe. I mean, the Serbs are sort of the last gasp of any kind of Russian influence in Europe, and that's why they're so the Western powers are so determined to bring the Serbs to heel, which is to eliminate Russia. So anyway, that it's a kind of a long-winded way of putting it that probably either the Battle of Moscow or the Battle of Stalingrad would be the most consequential battle in in 20th century history, because it was to ensure the West could not take um, basically Germany could not win the war, and as a consequence of Germany's not winning the war, we would have Russian or Soviet influence with right in the heart of Europe, something that was really an anathema to the West, and that they have sought, aggressively to counter since then. Anne Marie, thank you very much for your generosity, and it's very important that everybody goes to our because Anne Marie is our resident um, musical expert, our the Gaggle musical expert, and her kind of her learned and very insightful commentary on music is really important to the community. So we have the music club. I post a piece of the music, and so this week I posted the 12 etudes of Debussy, not one of his most popular or accessible piece of music, and Anne Marie has added her own unique, distinctive contribution to giving us a greater understanding of the etudes about this particular performance, and the different interpretations that are possible for Debussy. And I think Anne Marie, who's of course herself a distinguished professional musician, understands the importance of different interpretations of music for our understanding of a piece of music. So after this podcast, please go to the Gaggle locals page for the Gaggle Music Club and read Anne Marie's observation about the Debussy's uh, 12 etudes. Anyway, so thank you so much, Anne Marie. NKMRD says getting out of the EU was never part of the initial concept. Huh. I'm not quite sure what that's referring to, but maybe something that came up earlier. Um, but okay. Ivan Grozny seems all quiet on the peacemaking front between the U.S. and Russia. What are we waiting for this? Also, Trump says minerals deal to be signed Thursday. I think as I understood it, I mean, yeah, I think next Thursday, not today, but next Thursday. That was what they were saying at the presser. That was Scott Bessent who said this. I mean, I'm not sure again that there's anything much to this deal. I mean, we talk about a minerals deal, but of course, it's a much bigger deal than that. It's a big economic package extraction deal, um, and I think, look, no one's going to invest any money in Ukraine until the war is over. So it's so what Trump I think is trying to do um, is that, well, if we've got this partnership, if we have an economic partnership, and we're getting all this goods out of Ukraine, we get the Gazprom. They're going to take over the pipeline, the Gazprom pipeline that's actually inside Ukraine. That the Americans take that over. They take over ports, they take over infrastructure, minerals, whatever minerals there are. They're going to petrochemicals, everything. They take everything over. But what Trump is trying to do there is saying that, well, once we're so heavily involved in your economic activities, that should serve as a deterrence to any further attacks. I mean, Trump wants to get a deal. He basically just wants to get an agreement. And every time he's trying to do that, you get Zelensky who's saying, well, we want NATO membership, or in lieu of NATO membership, we want cast iron security guarantees from the United States. Now, the United States isn't going to provide a cast iron security guarantees. I mean, it can't happen. But Trump isn't going to do that. That's more than his career is worth. His supporters would not accept it. He wouldn't even be able to get it through Congress. So he has to find some formulation, as he sees it, some formulation that will get essentially Zelensky off his back. And so Zelensky will say, okay, I take that as a security guarantee. This is really the problem with Trump. I mean, Trump is just trying to find some formulation that can happen, that can keep the Russians happy, and that can keep Zelensky happy. He hasn't found it yet, um, but that doesn't mean that he won't. Um, and as I was saying earlier, the fact that he's so determined to bring it to an end, I mean, then ultimately you will find some way to do it. I mean, obviously, somebody's going to be very disappointed. Um, but I mean, I was thinking about the Nixon years from 1969 to 1973, and he came under a lot of criticism. Nixon, oh, he didn't end the war right away. He didn't withdraw American forces from Vietnam right away. Oh, he should have done this. No, he tried this, he tried that, whatever. But Nixon tried many different things, and that's kind of what you have to do if you want to bring it to an end. Nixon was determined in January 1969 to bring the American involvement in Vietnam to an end. No, he tried different things, and that's what you have to do. You try one thing, that doesn't work. He tries the Paris uh, peace talks. That's not getting anywhere. He started bombing the North. Well, that's not getting anywhere. He tries invading Cambodia. That doesn't get him anywhere. He tries to apply pressure on South Vietnam. That doesn't get him. He tries to go to China and the Russians and see, if they can help out with putting some pressure on Hanoi. But in the end, I mean, when you put all of it together, he found some formula that could actually extract the United States from Vietnam. I mean, I don't think Nixon claimed, oh, if only it hadn't been for Watergate, the security guarantees would have worked or whatever. But no, it didn't. But in the end, he had to threaten Saigon, he had to threaten Hanoi, and he finally found a formula. Now, I'm not saying Trump will find a formula, or that Trump has the patience or the diplomatic skill that Nixon had. Um, but it's going to be a complicated process. You can't just simply end it overnight. I know Trump said, "Oh, I'm going to end it in one day," um, but if he kind of says, if this thing with this agreement could serve as a security guarantee, then maybe that may be a way to do it, or it may not. Maybe he will have to eventually pull the plug on Zelensky. He spoke very impatiently about Zelensky today in the presser with Maloney. He said, "I'm not a big fan of Zelensky." And said he hasn't been a very good leader. These are these are major changes in U.S. policy. Just to talk, I'm not a big fan. He hasn't been a good leader. Of course, he hasn't been a good. He's been a terrible leader. He's been a disastrous leader for Ukraine. Um, so that will he get to a deal? I don't know. But if he's determined to do it, if he actually pursues this, an end to the war, then he'll get there. So I mean, we'll see what happens with the Iran thing. Again, there's a deal to be had in Iran if he pursues it. If he, however, goes in one direction, one Saturday, and then the next Saturday goes in a different direction, then he's not going to do it. So if he gets this deal on Iran, then one can say, Trump has ignored the Israel lobby. He's ignored the Israel hawks in his administration, um, and he's got this deal. He's ridden out the storm. He's going to come under a lot of attack. He's got this deal. Well, if he can get it on Iran, he can get a deal like that on Ukraine as well. Anyway, now, all right, let's go back. Then, where are we? So Vic Shakopoulos says, "Do you have any favorite Hungarian films?" I find Hungarian films very, very depressing, and I can't say that I've liked any Hungarian films. They're always very, very depressing. You talk about Istvan Szabó's films. They're okay. Not my favorite, but they're okay. Like Mephisto. There was a kind of a film about the early days of communism, Angivera. That was okay. I mean, not my thing, but the rest were kind of really, depressing. Marta Mészáros. She had there was a moment in our culture when I say in Britain, when people were showing these films of Marta Mészáros. Very, yeah, dreary, depressing, much like the Hungarians, kind of a suicide city. Now, with Hungarian films, you have to say that the best ones, as I say, even when it comes to Hollywood films, the best films are the very old films, the much less pretentious things. And the Hungarians used to make unpretentious, very very good comedies in 1930s. That was quite good. What is it? Dollar Papa. I don't know how exactly it's translated into English, but in Hungarian it's Dollar Papa. Very entertaining comedies, unpretentious and funny. Which is you think it's almost like an oxymoron, a Hungarian comedy. What you mean? It's not about somebody who wants to commit suicide, and it's not about the breakup of marriages, and a woman being left to look after a baby by herself, and that sort of stuff. No, this was a comedy, but, but I can't say that I can really recommend any Hungarian films. Szabó's films, and there was also Jancsó, Miklos Jancsó, who had his moment as well in the 1960s and 70s. The Red and the White. He made a film about the Russian Civil War, kind of also depressing, but not bad. The Roundup, not they were okay. I'd say Jancsó is among the better ones. So Sabo, Jancsó, and then, but really, if I was going to recommend anything, look up comedies of the Hungarian comedies of the 1930s, which is and particularly Dollar Papa. And I just, how it's translated, I don't know. But if you just look up Dollar Papa, I'm sure you'll get the translation. Robert says, speaking of Soleimani, what a refreshing change Trump 2.0 has turned out to be. It looks like Trump is now wise to the Pompeo, Esper, Haspel gang who put him up in the offing of Soleimani in the first administration. I agree. And he's saying, making good noises. I think, he was asked the question at the presser today about, hey, there's a story in the New York Times about how you came under some pressure to bomb Iran, and you waved it away. And he said, well, I didn't exactly wave it away. I'm just not very keen on doing it. So he didn't say he wasn't going to do it, but he said, I'm not very keen on doing it, and I think that is refreshing. It's not. It doesn't. He's not talking the language. Oh, we got to do it. There's an existential urgency about bombing Iran. So he's by saying, "No, I'm just not in any rush." I think that's very heartening. The fact that he's willing to give the negotiations a chance if he's going to do it. We had the talks in Oman, which were very positive. Not so positive over the past few days, but nonetheless, if then it's definitely good that he is saying, yeah, let's cool everything down. When there's no need for all this hysterical urgency that the Israel lobby is trying to inflict upon me. And Robert says for calming the canine nerves. Yes, that's right. Because remember the canine nerves, it immediately they sink their canines, their teeth, into me, because for my own failings. So that's always if they could just get angry, take out their anger on someone else, that would be okay. But the fact that they take it out on me, that's a problem. So I really appreciate anyone who says, "Yeah, I got to keep these dogs happy." Yeah, you got to keep them happy, because otherwise things are very grim. And then Richard Phillips says, "Oh, Maloney is just a good opera." Yeah, not Maloney, Georgia Maloney, not Maloney. Maloney sounds like an Irish name. Maloney, Italian name, is just a good operator with no real fixed opinions. I think that's fair. I think that's probably it's a good description of her. And then Richard Phillips says, maybe she doesn't like effete, creepy men. Okay, I think that's probably true. I think you can never underestimate the personal aspect of geopolitics. I think that's probably right. I mean, I think you're right that in the case why she takes such a obviously visceral dislike for Macron, that it at some you know gut level she finds him just creepy. And, there is, without doubt, there is something creepy about him. But when you see the faces that she pulls whenever he's around her, you can see that she just responds at a visceral level, and that's often the case with women. Men could just feign interest, politeness, smile, and whatever. She's not someone who feigns anything. I think she just uh, I think she goes with her feelings, and and you can, by the same token, you can see her body language when she's in the presence of Elon Musk. Um, and that's why there was been speculation that there was something going on between them. I don't think there is, but you can see that almost like when they're together, um, that it wouldn't take much for them to you know uh, to get involved, shall we say? So, and then Richard Phelps says, "I don't see Trump being into a Victorian school mistress." No, I don't see it. I think he's not really. I don't think that's his thing. He really didn't hit it off with. Speaking of Victorian schoolmistress, he didn't hit it off with Theresa May. Theresa May, well, I think he's the first visitor in 2017, and they really didn't hit it off. So that's very much the Victorian schoolmistress. That's not his style. Um, and then it says. That's a logical fallacy. Just because you believe one conspiracy might be true doesn't mean you believe all conspiracies might be true. No, I think that sounds reasonable. I mean, I don't think it's appropriate to me. I think it's appropriate to someone else. No, I mean, I think but that's why when people talk about, oh, it's a conspiracy theory, well, some conspiracies may be true. It doesn't mean that every conspiracy theory is false, just like it doesn't mean that every conspiracy theory is true. There may be some that are true, um, and but doesn't mean that all of them. So when it comes to the JFK thing, I can't I can't get just accept any of the alternative theories. So it's unfortunate because the official story is so unexciting, uninspiring. I mean, also it just seems such a minor, pathetic, contemptible creature, but it's much better to have some big conspiracy that killed Kennedy. I mean, it's more intellectually satisfying. Yes, important players were all involved, and there was a brilliant mastermind in charge of it, and they all came up with this great conspiracy to kill him, to cover it up, find a patsy, and so on. That's great. I mean, it's more satisfying. The reality, I think, is just disappointing. Um, anyway, then NKMRD says, yeah, nowadays people wear politics like some soccer hooligan wears his patches on his vest 20 years ago. Kind of strange, but that's the modern times, and we have to deal with it. Yeah, I think so. It's a little like this new, there are the two new heroes, in this. And I'm watching the news. One is Jerome Powell, the Fed chair. Oh yeah, Jerome Powell, he's standing up to Trump, and old CNN is very exciting. Oh, Jerome Powell, he's just told Trump, I'm not going anywhere. You're not going to get rid of me. Oh, that's it. It's fantastic. He's standing up to Trump. This is a central banker. These are the worst people ever. These are these central bankers who squeeze economies, squeeze people out of work, then accountable to no one. They're not accountable to voters. They're not even accountable to elected politicians. They have no accountability. They have enormous power, but they're unanswerable. So when he says arrogantly, "Well, I'm staying put. Trump isn't going to get rid of me," and everyone, oh, fantastic! Oh, yeah, really great. So this is on the new hero, you know, the chair of the Fed, the chair of the central bank, and then the other hero is Xi Jinping, the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, the leader of China. So it was only like the day before yesterday when we were talking about the genocide of the Uyghurs. The Congress was talking about the genocide of the Uyghurs and about how the terrible things that the Chinese supposedly did to the Uyghurs. Well, it was only the day before yesterday we were told that how Trump likes dictators, and that's why he seems to like Xi Jinping. Now Xi Jinping is becoming the sort of the new Zelensky. Everyone loves Xi Jinping. Soon people will be wearing the sort of the Chinese flag in their, next to the Ukrainian flag in their lapels. Oh, I'm with Xi Jinping. Well, Xi Jinping demands to be treated with respect. Oh, demands to be treated. That's you see CNN. These pompous asses on CNN like Stephen Collinson. He's the worst. He's a Brit, which means that's why he's the worst. And China, Xi Jinping demands to be treated with respect. China must be treated with respect. Yeah, and does China treat others with respect? Anyway, so now this is the new hero, the hero of the hour, Jerome Powell and Xi Jinping. And then Vic Shakapopoulos says, I had a discussion with George about it before. My point is that his argument was that as long as I cannot prove what exactly was a conspiracy, I had to accept the official nonsensical story by default. It's not quite. I mean, I think I know I can see why you're saying that. I didn't say. I just said that you have that there has to be a plausible alternative that before you can call into question something that for which there was a lot of evidence. So if you present a theory for which there's a lot of evidence, then in order to refute it, then you at least have to come up with a plausible theory with supporting evidence. And I think that's my problem with those questioning the JFK assassination. But anyway, thanks a lot, Vic. Um, Marx, 2020. I was wondering where you were. George, a bit late tonight. Have I missed your China bashing? Yeah, I'm sorry. It's getting a little late now, so I don't know. I can't get back to the China thing today, but next time, I'm sure. I did notice, George, that you never challenged Professor Morandi on the destruction of the oil countries of the Middle East that collaborate with the Americans. Well, you're right. I was on my best behavior, and I was very polite. And I think that when you bring on guests on the gaggle, I don't think it's entirely appropriate to challenge them, to give them a hard time. Um, after all, I have many opportunities on the gaggle. Well, when I do my solo live stream or when I'm talking with Peter, to present my point of view. So I didn't see any purpose to getting into an argument with Morandi. I mean, he's doing us a favor by appearing. He doesn't get paid for it, so he's doing us a favor, giving us his time. I don't know what point it would have been for me to challenge him and getting into an argument. However, I'd say I didn't agree with him. I just, I let it go. I let him speak, and that's why we had him on, just to let him speak. And that's the whole purpose of having guests on. We let them express their views. So yeah, you're right. I didn't challenge him, and I didn't really want to do it. But anyway, Max, thanks a lot. And next time I'm sure you you will have you'll be able to show up why my views on China are false. Anyway, thank you. Marty says London is full of Americans. I never seen and heard so many Americans in London. Oh, you're in London right now? Oh, okay, all right. Um, yeah, that's interesting. Where they are. And Mark says, I agree with you, George, that Moscow was the beginning of the end and Kursk being the final nail in the Nazi and Axis armies. Yeah, that's right. And then Richard Phillips says, I live in London and people overdo it a little bit. It really depends where you are. For example, I've never been mugged or even had my phone stolen. And I've lived here 50 years. Yeah, there's too many migrants, but it's still a reasonably nice place to be. It's certainly not very English, though, but London has always been weird. I suppose so. It's very funny that whenever you look at London in the 1960s or London in the 1970s, it does seem very, very, very different from the London of today. I wonder which part of London you're in. You said that you've never been mugged, you've never been attacked. I'm curious which part of London, if you live. I mean, because I'm sure if you live in I'm trying to think when I lived in London, did anyone ever really attack me? No, but I lived in I lived in the I was already a while ago, but I lived in the kind of nice parts of London, um, where there wasn't really too much by way of crime. Um, but the stories that I hear though for people who do live in London it's a little scary. Going home from the tube station to your house late in the evening. I think people are quite scared. And I think that that's um, but I guess it's probably not if you're living in Knightsbridge. Probably not if you're living in Chelsea, um, South Kensington. But elsewhere, I think it probably is quite scary. Anyway, um, NKMRD says today I bought a bottle of NKMRD says today I bought a bottle of soft drink in Germany. I opened the bottle and the lid separated from the bottle. Huh. If you are not Central European, you don't even know what this means to us. You have no idea of the revolution implied by this change. I opened the bottle and the lid separated from the bottle. If you're not Central, you don't know what this means. Um, so I guess that means what that yeah, that's probably the way. I'm trying to think because that's the way Americans drink. Yeah, you open a bottle, you take the lid off, and it comes off completely. Whereas in Hungary, I'm trying to think. In Hungary, yes, the lid doesn't come off automatically. You actually have to wrench it off. So if you just open it, the lid stays attached to the bottle. Um, Yeah. And then Richard Phillips says, I kind of like the bottle cap being attached to the bottle because I tend to drop them and they end up going over to the Hoover tube. Yep, that's very, very true. Yeah, I also tend to drop them, and they invariably roll behind the gas stove, or they roll behind the furniture, and then it's a pain in the neck to try to find them. You're absolutely right. NK Mahdi says, I opened the Schweppes bottle and the lid and the bottle became two different things. It used to be back like it used to be back in the old days. Okay, well that's yeah, all right. Yeah, I guess I'm just used to that. The American, I thought of that the American way, but then you got the um, yeah. But but the in Hungary, I mean the lid does attach to the bottle, but I haven't really. It never really occurred to me. I just sort of, I took it the way it was in America, and I take it the way it is in Hungary, and I haven't really thought about it. Marty says, just my experience. When everyone notices, I think it's when everyone notices this, I think it's probably happening. All right. All right. And Richard Phillips says, this I guess this is apropos of the JFK. It really is just academic. Now it's been 60 years. We're never going to know. I don't really have a problem with any theory and see no reason to get emotionally invested. I mean, we don't even know who really was behind Trump's attempted assassination. Yeah, I tend to think that. I mean, I think it's a long time ago now, and I don't even understand the theory. Let's say if there was a conspiracy to kill him, what what had been accomplished as a result? I mean, how did the world change by the assassination? Whereas I don't really think the world changed very much. I mean, obviously, personally, it was tragic. I'm sure many Americans were traumatized by the death of a president, young, charismatic president, and people were traumatized. But in terms of world history, geopolitics, I don't see that his death made much of a difference. So that's another reason why I've always been skeptical of the conspiracy, because the whole point of a political assassination is that something changes. If try to get rid of de Gaulle, then the goal is that his policy on Algeria, on giving Algeria independence, will stop. Um, so the political assassination is usually undertaken with a view to changing it. I mean, there's a reason why somebody wanted to assassinate Trump. Now, but you're absolutely right, Richard. Well, who was really behind that? I don't know. And it's quite interesting how little interest there is to find out who was really behind this. The guy was just shot dead there and then, and we know nothing about it. Boom, he was just shot dead. And you think, how the hell did he get there? How did he find a spot, a perfect spot without any trouble at all, a perfect spot to take a shot at him? Who is he? Who are his parents? Do we know anything about his background? Was he political? Whatever. I mean, it's amazing. So while we're obsessing about Kennedy, this assassination attempt less than a year ago seems to arouse very little interest. Um, um, and Marty says maybe Trump was behind Trump's assassination. So he was playing golf a couple of hours after the event. And Richard says he was too close a shave for him to be behind it. He almost got his head blown off. Yeah, I agree. That he was behind it was leftist propaganda to undermine his survival. Yeah, I agree. That's the line put forward by some of the people at MSNBC. The so yeah, that he was somehow did it himself. Um, and all right, let's. Um, anyway, let's see if there's anything further. All right, so this I think is a interesting discussion going on, which people can join on the Kennedy assassination. I think I've said what I think. So, but there are other gagglers who want to continue the discussion, and that's fine. So, um, please continue. Um, However, my time is up. Thank you so much, everybody who joined me. Thank you for all of your comments, criticisms, ideas, suggestions, opinions. Really appreciate them. Always fun. So we got the weekend. We'll do some podcasts with Peter over the weekend, and then we have the live stream with Peter on Monday, and then on Tuesday we have the live stream solo, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, instruction: everybody go to the Gaggle locals page, go to the music club, um, listen to Debussy's Etudes, read Anne Marie's fascinating observations, and get involved in the Gaggle. Please subscribe, and then we have a screening. We have a screening of the films and opera. I think for Monday, the runner-up, and then the following Monday we'll have a Gaggler suggestion to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Hanoi's entrance into Saigon, a really remarkable event. So 50th anniversary, we're going to have a screening of one of the myriad films that were made about the Vietnam War. So that was an excellent suggestion, and we're going to do that. Not this coming Monday, but the Monday after that. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody, for your time and attention. And remember, if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. All the best. Bye bye. Good night. See you.